Chapter 1. Violet and Silence. The rain in Oakhaven wasn't rain, not anymore. It was a weeping, viscous violet, staining the slate roofs and clinging to the skeletal branches of the dead oaks that gave the village its name. It tasted of iron and regret, a constant reminder of what had been taken, what was being demanded. The Violet Blight, they called it, though no one could truly say where it originated. Some whispered of a curse, others of a god's displeasure, still others of the Shogun's own twisted ambition. All agreed on one thing: it had brought death, and with it, a chilling, oppressive silence. Ren moved through the ruined streets with the quiet desperation of a ghost. He was a study in muted tones, charcoal-gray bandages pulled tight against his arms, concealing a frame honed by years of brutal training, and eyes, perpetually milky white, reflecting not the world, but the echoes of pain within it. He didn't walk, he flowed, a ripple in the stagnant air, guided less by sight and more by the subtle shifts in despair. Oakhaven, once a collection of weathered timber homes and bustling trade, was now a mausoleum, a testament to the Shogun's cold, calculating cruelty. Had it arrived a week ago, drawn by the whispers carried on the violet wind. Whispers of young men taken, their bodies drained of their nervous systems, the silk tribute to fuel the Shogun's grotesque immortality. Whispers of harvesters, mechanical abominations that hunted the remaining villagers, their movements unsettlingly fluid, their porcelain bodies unnervingly clean. He hadn't come seeking glory, nor justice in the conventional sense. He sought the unraveling of knots, the disentangling of corrupted threads. He paused before the skeletal remains of the village well, the water once a source of life now choked with violet sludge. A young woman's shawl, bleached almost white by the blight, lay draped across the crumbling stone. He didn't touch it, didn't linger. Sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. Instead, he focused, extending a sense akin to a spider's web, feeling the lingering resonance of the girl's final moments, the frantic throb of her terror, the sickening, drawn-out severance of her nerves. The sensation was a bitter draught, a reminder of his own past, a past he actively tried to bury beneath layers of honed skill and unsettling detachment. The air shifted subtly, the violet rain intensifying momentarily as he exerted his focus. He wasn't a warrior in the traditional sense. He wasn't driven by rage or a desire for vengeance. He was a ghost ditcher, a title head earned through years of solitary training, a student of a forgotten discipline, the manipulation of shadows themselves. It was a dangerous art, one that drew him perilously close to the edges of sanity, a practice frowned upon even amongst the most obscure martial traditions. He hadn't expected to find the Shogun's fortress so easily. The villagers spoke of impenetrable defenses, of monstrous guardians, but he found only a crumbling pagoda, woven entirely from iridescent, pulsing silk. The very air thrummed with an unsettling energy, thick with the stench of decay and something far more ancient, something akin to the whispers of a spider's mind. As he approached, he sensed the harvesters, a dozen of the porcelain monstrosities, patrolling the perimeter. They were unsettlingly graceful, their movements precise, almost hypnotic. He observed them for a moment, recognizing a pattern in their patrols, a predictable rhythm dictated by their limited programming. This wasn't a battle against brute strength. It was a game of observation, of anticipating the next move. He initiated his technique, Umbral Threading. It wasn't a flashy display of power. There was no dramatic channeling of energy, no visible manipulation of the shadows. Instead, he subtly shifted his perception, aligning his senses with the flow of darkness, subtly amplifying the threads of shadow inherent in the environment. It was like extending his own body into the gloom, becoming one with the absence of light. With a barely perceptible movement of his wrists, he began to draw the shadows of the harvesters outwards, weaving them into a dense, barbed net. The porcelain limbs of the constructs stiffened as the shadows seized them, twisting and constricting, crushing the delicate mechanisms within. The sound was a sickening crunch, the disintegration of bone and metal, reduced to a fine white powder that swirled in the violet rain. It was a brutal, elegant dance of destruction, a demonstration of control over the very essence of darkness. He dispatched the first 3 with chilling efficiency, each kill a silent testament to the fragility of the Shogun's creations. He wasn't seeking to destroy. He was revealing the inherent weakness within their design, their dependence on the shadows they were built to exploit. The violet rain continued to fall, washing away the remnants of his work, leaving only the chilling silence and the lingering scent of shattered porcelain. Ren stood amidst the carnage, a solitary figure cloaked in shadows, and knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that this was only the beginning. The Shogun wasn't merely a man, he was a nexus, a point of concentrated corruption, and unraveling him would require a degree of precision and a willingness to delve into darkness that bordered on oblivion. Chapter 2. The Loom of Whispers. The violet rain hadn't truly ceased. It clung to the ravaged silk rubble of the Shogun's palace, a persistent, melancholic shroud. The air still tasted of ozone and pulverized bone, a sterile tang overlaid with the faintest scent of jasmine, a perverse, unsettling reminder of the Shogun's obsession with beauty and decay. Ren, emerging from the gray mist clinging to the outer walls, moved with a deliberate slowness, each step measured, a cautious calculation of distance and the subtle shifts in the remaining shadows. His bandages, now stained a deeper, almost bruised purple, seemed to absorb the ambient gloom, amplifying his blindness. He relied not on sight, but on a heightened awareness of pressure, temperature, and the phantom vibrations of the world, an echo of sensation built upon the absence of light. He hadn't sought out this battle. The village elder, a skeletal woman named Lyra, had tracked him down, her breath rattling in her chest like dried leaves. She had spoken of the unraveling, as she called it, the slow, agonizing dismantling of the Shogun's power, the return of something akin to silence to Oakhaven. She had offered him a single unnerving piece of information: the Shogun wasn't simply corrupted, he was woven. His very being, his unnatural existence, was built upon an intricate parasitic loom of shadow threads, and Ren was, unknowingly, the only one who could truly sever them. As he moved deeper into the shattered palace, the architectural anomalies began to shift from grotesque horror to unsettling artistry. The web-like structure, initially a chaotic mass of pulsating silk, had solidified into a remarkably precise lattice, resembling a colossal, frozen tapestry. The threads themselves, no longer a simple, menacing darkness, seemed to shimmer with an internal luminescence, hinting at a complex, almost conscious awareness. Ren paused, extending a hand, the movement unsettlingly fluid, as if he were reaching into the very fabric of reality. He felt them, the threads, not as tangible objects, but as currents, whispers of cold despair, clinging to him like cobwebs. "He doesn't fight," Ren murmured, his voice swallowed by the silence. "He is the fight. He is the knot." He began to unravel the immediate perimeter, employing a technique Head termed thread dissonance. It wasn't brute force, but a carefully calibrated disruption of the Shogun's meticulously constructed network. He drew upon the Violet Blight itself, amplifying its inherent chaotic energy, projecting it outward like a sonic wave, but one that resonated with the specific frequency of the demonic threads. It was akin to tuning a discordant instrument, creating an imbalance within the Shogun's creation. The result wasn't immediate annihilation. Instead, the threads began to fray, to twitch with unnatural spasms. Sections of the web structure pulsed with an accelerated, frantic rhythm before collapsing inward, showering the floor with fragments of translucent silk and shards of porcelain. It was agonizingly slow, a meticulous dismantling, like a surgeon carefully removing a malignant growth. He sensed the Shogun's awareness, a churning, indignant presence that lashed out with tendrils of shadow, attempting to bind him, to drag him into the swirling vortex of his own tormented existence. Ren responded not with resistance, but with absorption. He drew the disrupted threads into himself, feeling the torrent of despair, the echoes of countless stolen lives, flooding his senses. It was a dangerous practice, a deliberate invitation to madness, but he found a perverse solace in it, a quiet understanding of the Shogun's desperation, his own twisted quest for immortality. "You seek to be whole," Ren whispered, his voice strained. "But wholeness, born of darkness, can only bring more darkness." As he worked, a rhythmic scraping sound broke the unsettling silence. He rotated, his movements guided by the shifting patterns of the threads, and saw it a new construct emerging from the deepest recesses of the palace. It wasn't one of the lumbering harvesters, but a smaller, more refined being, shaped like a raven crafted from polished obsidian. Its eyes glowed with the same unsettling violet light as the rain, and it moved with a chilling grace, monitoring his progress. This was a shadow puppet, a sentinel specifically designed to counter disruptions in the Shogun's loom. Ren recognized the technique immediately, a condensed, highly concentrated application of umbral threading, designed to pinpoint and neutralize threats. He didn't engage in direct combat. Instead, he wove a counter thread, layering it with threads of solidified regret, with the screams of the villagers had rescued. He didn't try to destroy it, but to break it, to inject it with the very emotions it was intended to suppress. The shadow puppet lunged, a blur of obsidian and violet, its claws tipped with shards of crystallized shadow. Ren deflected the attack with a precision born of instinct and an unnerving sensitivity to the flow of darkness, not with a blade, but with a carefully controlled wave of distorted shadow energy. The puppet froze mid-air, its glowing eyes flickering erratically before dissolving into a puff of iridescent smoke, leaving behind only a single, perfectly preserved raven feather. "You create echoes," Ren said, his voice laced with grim amusement. "And echoes, ultimately, consume themselves." He knew with a growing certainty that the Shogun wasn't merely defending his fortress. He was actively learning from him, adapting, evolving. The fight wasn't about destroying the loom, it was about understanding its intricate design, and ultimately, about disrupting its very source. He needed to find the nexus, the point where the Shogun's corrupted will intersected with the ancient spider demon's influence. And he suspected, with a chilling dread, that it was not within this palace, but within himself. Chapter 3. The loom within the morning mist clung to Oakhaven like a shroud, thicker now, tinged with the violet bloom that had once been the sky. Ren moved through it, a muted presence guided by the subtle tremors of the land, by the lingering psychic residue of suffering. The task of cleansing wasn't one of sweeping away the physical, the silk-strewn ruins of the palace, still pulsed with a morbid, unsettling beauty, but of unraveling the metaphysical knots that bound the village to the Shogun's influence. He wasn't rebuilding, he was patiently dismantling a nightmare stitched together from stolen souls. He found his first significant breakthrough in the shattered remains of the Shogun's library, a chamber choked with dust and the faint scent of decay, ironically preserved by the clinging violet. He didn't search for books, understanding instinctively that the written word was merely a vessel for the Shogun's warped thought. Instead, he focused on the echoes of his actions, layering his umbral threading against the residual distortions, searching for the nexus. It wasn't a place, he realized, but a state of being. He discovered it etched onto a single, enormous porcelain tile, embedded in the floor a detailed, almost obsessive rendering of a spider's web. Not a simple pattern, but a three-dimensional map of interwoven shadows, each strand pulsating with a faint, malignant energy. As he touched it, a torrent of visions slammed into him, the villagers' faces, contorted in terror as the harvesters descended the Shogun's bloated form, a grotesque parody of a ruler, feeding on their anguish and, most disturbingly, his own hand, moving with an unnatural precision, manipulating the shadows. The shard of recognition was agonizing. He hadn't consciously woven the threads of despair and regret they had bled into him, infecting his own power. The Shogun wasn't simply harvesting nerves, he was cultivating a reflection of himself, a darker, more ruthless version, a conduit for the spider demon's influence. "It's a loom," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the whispering mist. "Not just for robes, for souls." He began to work, meticulously, with a desperate urgency fueled by this unsettling revelation. He employed the centipede's severance, not against the tile itself, but against the threads of the vision. He didn't attack the source of the corruption, but the pathway through which it flowed. With each microscopic cut, the visions fragmented, dissolving into fleeting images of regret, of lost hope, of the agonizing beauty of Oakhaven's final moments. It was an act of surgical self-removal, a painful process of detaching himself from the Shogun's parasitic grasp. As he continued, the violet bloom in the air shifted, momentarily retreating, replaced by a deeper, almost palpable darkness. He realized, with a growing sense of horror, that the Shogun wasn't merely learning from him, he was becoming him. The corrupted threads he had meticulously woven around himself were, in turn, strengthening the Shogun's control, feeding his own burgeoning ability. He needed a new approach, one that didn't simply break the Shogun's influence, but severed the connection entirely. He needed to reach the core, not with force, but with truth. Rising to his feet, he began a process he hadn't dared attempt before he began to weave his own shadow thread, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. He focused on the darkest recesses of his own mind, the echoes of past violence, the grief over his lost sight, the burning responsibility for the suffering he had witnessed. He layered this raw, unfiltered pain into the umbral threading, transforming it not into a weapon, but into a plea, a direct confrontation with the Shogun's corruption. The effect was immediate and chaotic. The violet bloom intensified, coalescing into a vortex of shadowy energy. The tile beneath his feet shattered, showering him with fragments of porcelain and shimmering thread. He felt a physical resistance, a powerful force pushing against him, attempting to drag him into the abyss of the Shogun's will. Then, he saw him not the bloated monstrosity of the palace, but a younger version, trapped within the swirling shadows, desperately clinging to the loom. It wasn't a battle, but a meeting. The younger Shogun was a reflection of Ren's own youth, his own youthful idealism, twisted into a venomous cynicism. He reached out, a skeletal hand offering a single pulsing thread of violet. "Join us," the younger Shogun's voice rasped, a distorted echo of Ren's own. "Embrace the silence. Feel nothing." Ren didn't recoil. Ha! He met the offer with a torrent of his own pain, weaving his own agony into a shimmering tapestry of defiance. "You mistake numbness for peace," he hissed, his voice amplified by the raw power of his umbral threading. "It is merely the absence of feeling, and the absence of feeling is a far greater prison than any darkness." He unleashed the full force of his woven sorrow, not as an attack, but as a shattering wave of recognition. The younger Shogun recoiled, screaming in silent agony as the shadows he had created began to unravel, dissolving into nothingness. The violet bloom sputtered and died. As the last vestiges of the Shogun's influence within the tile vanished, Ren collapsed, drained and trembling, the dark bandages on his arms soaked with a viscous, shimmering fluid, the essence of the broken weave. He knew with a chilling certainty that the fight wasn't over. The loom wasn't destroyed. It was merely silenced. And he was inextricably bound to its fragile, terrifying potential. Chapter 4. Echoes in the Loom. The morning mist clung to Oakhaven like a shroud, thicker now, saturated with the residual energy of Ren's victory. The village, ravaged but breathing, was a monument to a struggle that hadn't been about steel and blood, but about the corruption of intention. The silk rubble, once a terrifying tapestry of the Shogun's influence, was now a melancholic reminder of a battle fought in the very fabric of despair. He moved through it with a deliberate slowness, the charcoal bandages shifting against his skin, a constant, unsettling murmur of dark energy. The fluid that had drained him, the essence of the broken weave, had receded, leaving behind a faint metallic tang in the air and a chilling awareness of his own depleted state. He found himself drawn to the center of the ruined pagoda, to the space where the younger shogun had first offered the violet thread. There, barely discernible beneath the accumulated detritus, was a small, intricately carved loom, not of polished wood and gleaming bronze, but of something akin to fossilized bone, stained with an unsettling iridescent purple. It was silent, still, but pulsed with a latent power that resonated with a mournful hum. This was the loom itself, the source of the Shogun's influence, a meticulously crafted prison designed to trap not just bodies, but souls. Ren reached out, his hand pale and strangely cold, hovering over the loom. He felt a faint vibration, a whispering echo of the Shogun's consciousness, not a raging inferno of malice, but a lingering regret, a profound and terrible loneliness. It wasn't an enemy he could vanquish with a blade. It was a wound he had to cauterize. He knew with a sickening certainty that destroying the loom would be a futile gesture. It wasn't a thing to be shattered, but a tapestry to be unraveled, thread by agonizing thread. He began to work, not with force, but with a painstaking, almost devotional patience. He initiated the umbral threading, not to attack, but to observe, to trace the flow of the remaining demonic energy. The shadows in the room deepened, swirling not with the violent energy of the Shogun's earlier corruption, but with a muted, sorrowful luminescence. They coalesced around the loom, revealing its intricate construction, a dizzying network of interlocking threads, each infused with a fragment of the Shogun's tormented soul. He realized, with a growing sense of horror, that the younger shogun hadn't just been offering a path to powerhead, been offering a solution to his own pain. The violet thread wasn't a conduit for demonic influence. It was a carefully calibrated projection of sorrow, designed to lure others into a similar, self-destructive spiral. The shogun hadn't traded humanity for power, had traded despair for a twisted form of control. As he worked, layering threads of his own sorrow, the memories of lost faces, the weight of countless lives had salvaged from oblivion into the existing tapestry, the echoes of the younger shogun's voice grew stronger, more insistent. It wasn't a hostile assault, but a desperate plea, a mirroring of his own youthful idealism, now consumed by a suffocating cynicism. "Don't," the voice whispered, laced with a profound sadness. "You are making it worse. You are merely adding to the threads, perpetuating the cycle." Ren didn't respond, continuing his meticulous unraveling. "The cycle ends not in silence, but in recognition," he replied, his voice a barely audible rasp. "You built this prison to escape pain, but you created a far greater one for yourself. A prison of unending regret." He focused on the core of the loom, on the central spindle where the violet thread had been anchored. As he reached out, not with force, but with understanding, he felt the youthful anguish, the desperate yearning for something to believe in, the poisoned seed of ambition. He wove his own empathy into the surrounding shadows, attempting to soothe the lingering torment, to offer a different path, one not of numbness, but of acceptance. The room shifted subtly. The purple luminescence of the loom dimmed, becoming a bruised, melancholic gray. The whispers of the younger shogun faded, replaced by a fragile, almost mournful sigh. But as the last vestiges of the shogun's influence dissipated, a new awareness bloomed within Ren, a chilling realization. He hadn't simply unraveled the shogun's tapestry, had become interwoven with it. The threads of the loom hadn't been severed. They had been absorbed, subtly altering the very structure of his being. He could feel a nascent echo of the shogun's despair within his own soul, a constant, low-level hum of sorrow that threatened to consume him. He pulled back, his hand instinctively shielding his face, as if to block out the growing darkness. He understood now. The fight wasn't over. It had never truly begun. It was a constant, agonizing process of weaving, of unweaving, of constantly confronting the echoes of those heads saved, those who had consumed, those who had consumed him. The Ghost Stitcher wasn't a savior, he was a nexus, a conduit for the suffering of a broken land. And the violet thread, though seemingly silenced, still lingered, waiting to be rewoven. He turned to leave, his movements slow and deliberate, the charcoal bandages shifting with a quiet, unsettling rhythm. As he stepped back into the mist, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he was not merely unraveling evil, he was unraveling himself. Chapter 5. The loom's resonance. The mist clung to Ren like a shroud, colder now, laced with the metallic scent of unraveling. It wasn't simply the physical chill of the approaching dawn. It was the residue of the Shogun's despair, a phantom cold that settled deep within his bones. He moved with a leaden grace, not driven by purpose, but by a compulsion born of this unsettling resonance. The village, rebuilt with salvaged silk and the grim determination of its survivors, felt wrong. Not in a purely destructive way, but as if a fundamental chord had been shifted, leaving a dissonant echo. He found himself drawn back to the loom, the epicenter of the initial corruption. The room, once dominated by the grotesque Shogun and his pulsating creation, was now a hollow shell, the translucent webbing having largely dissipated, leaving a slick, shimmering residue on the polished stone floor. Yet, the loom itself remained, a colossal structure of dark petrified wood inlaid with veins of violet that seemed to subtly throb. He approached it cautiously, his blind hands outstretched, not seeking a confrontation, but an understanding, a desperate attempt to decipher the pattern had unwittingly become a part of. The touch was immediate, a jarring cascade of sensation. It wasn't physical pain, not in the conventional sense. It was a deluge of emotion, a torrent of agonizing regret and unwavering ambition, filtered through the brittle consciousness of the Shogun. He saw flashes, glimpses of a younger man, driven by a desperate desire for immortality, seduced by the spider demon's promises. He witnessed the construction of the harvesters, each limb meticulously crafted with stolen souls, the panicked screams of the villagers, a constant, grinding soundtrack. But more importantly, he felt the Shogun's terror, the terror of a man consumed by his own creation, trapped within a cycle of violence and increasingly monstrous transformation. Ren staggered back, instinctively pulling his bandages tighter, attempting to insulate himself from the psychic intrusion. The hum of sorrow intensified, a low thrumming that threatened to drown out his own thoughts. He realized with a chilling clarity that the absorption hadn't been a violent act of consumption, it had been a desperate, echoing mirroring. The loom wasn't just a source of power, it was a living repository of suffering, and he, in his pursuit of justice, had become its anchor. He began to experiment, cautiously touching the violet veins of the loom, seeking to understand the mechanics of this disturbing connection. As he did, the room shifted again, not in a dramatic visual way, but in the subtle modulation of the resonance. He felt the loom attempting to weave within him, to incorporate his own anxieties, his own regrets, into its endless cycle. The fear was palpable, a fear of oblivion, of being forgotten, of having no purpose beyond the endless, agonizing repetitions of suffering. An old woman, Hannah, one of the few villagers who'd witnessed Ren's actions, cautiously approached him. She was a weaver herself, her hands gnarled and scarred from years of labor. She didn't speak, simply offering him a small, intricately knotted piece of charcoal, a familiar gesture from her past. As he took it, he felt a flicker of recognition, a ghost of warmth that momentarily pushed back the encroaching cold. "The threads, they don't just reside in the loom," she finally said, her voice a low rasp. They reside in those who touch them, in those who believe they can mend what is broken. Her words struck a profound chord. It wasn't about severing the threads, it was about understanding their nature, accepting their influence, perhaps even learning to manipulate them with a different kind of skill. The Shogun hadn't simply created a weapon head, created a system, a self-perpetuating loop of pain and control. He spent the next few hours meticulously studying the loom, not with the intent of destroying it, but of observing it, of mapping the flow of its resonance. He discovered that the violet threads responded not only to violence but to despair, to loss, to the quiet, unspoken anxieties of the villagers. The loom amplified these emotions, shaping them into the monstrous forms of the harvesters, driving them to perpetrate the cycle of suffering. Suddenly, he understood the true nature of his power. The black cocoon, the umbral threading, the centipede severance, they weren't just combat techniques, they were attempts to interrupt the loom's rhythm, to disrupt its insidious influence. But they were also, in their own way, feeding it. He realized he couldn't simply unravel the loom, he needed to learn to reweave it, to redirect the flow of suffering, to transform the raw anguish into something else. As dusk settled, casting long, spectral shadows across the village, Ren stood before the loom, his charcoal bandages stained with violet. He raised his hand, not with a gesture of attack, but with a deliberate, measured movement. He didn't pull at the threads, he guided them. He began to weave, not with malice, but with a tentative, almost mournful hope. The violet luminescence intensified, not with the grotesque energy of the Shogun's ambition, but with a softer, gentler glow. And within the humming resonance he heard, not the echo of despair, but the faintest whisper of acceptance, a single fragile note of peace. The violet thread, though still lingering, seemed calmer. He knew with a profound and unsettling certainty that the fight wasn't over, but it was finally shifting. He was no longer simply unraveling evil, he was learning to weave it into something new. Chapter 6. The Echo of Acceptance. The air in the ravaged square hung thick and heavy, not with the cloying sweetness of the Violet Blight, but with the palpable weight of what Ren had wrought. The silk rubble, once a testament to the Shogun's depravity, was now a landscape of muted hues, charcoal, violet, and a disturbing, unsettling gray. The silence, broken only by the drip of condensed moisture from the ruined pagoda, was profound, pregnant with a stillness that felt almost sacred. He continued to weave, his movements deliberate and painstaking. The charcoal bandages, now saturated with violet dye, clung to his skin like mourning shrouds, each thread a tiny vessel of absorbed pain and potential. He wasn't driven by a surge of power, not the desperate, frantic channeling head used against the Shogun. Instead, it was a slow, almost meditative process, guided by a sense of resonance he hadn't fully understood until this moment. He wasn't trying to destroy the loom, he was attempting to understand its song, to listen for the dissonance that birthed such monstrous creations. The initial attempts had been clumsy, almost violent. The violet luminescence had flared erratically, threatening to escalate the situation. But now, he focused on nuance, on the smallest adjustments in the flow of the thread. He visualized it not as a tangled knot to be brutally severed, but as a stream, burdened by obstacles, its current corrupted. He realized the loom wasn't merely a generator of horror, but a receiver, a sponge for the collective grief and despair of Oakhaven. The Shogun hadn't simply taken nerves head-fed on the villagers' anguish, amplifying their suffering into tangible, destructive forms. The true horror wasn't the monsters themselves, but the fundamental instability of the emotional landscape they represented. As he worked, he felt a subtle shift in the air. The violet luminescence was becoming less frantic, more contained. It wasn't vanishing, but it was mellowing, softening around the edges. He began to perceive faint echoes of the original weaving, not the frenzied, chaotic patterns of the Shogun's influence, but something older, something quieter. It wasn't a tapestry of anguish, but the foundational threads of sorrow, loss, and a stubborn, enduring hope. He realized the harvesters, in their grotesque forms, weren't truly agents of evil. They were projections, echoes of the village's own shattered dreams, given horrifying physicality by the Shogun's manipulation. Their violence wasn't born of malice, but of a desperate primal need to do something, to find meaning in a world stripped of all solace. A low groan escaped his lips, a sound of profound weariness. "It's like trying to silence a weeping child," he murmured, his voice rough with disuse. "You can't simply stop the tears, you must acknowledge the pain. Offer a touch of comfort, a small, genuine connection." He adjusted his technique, introducing a counterweave, a subtle thread of acceptance, colored with a deeper shade of violet. It was an act of profound vulnerability, a willingness to acknowledge the pain without succumbing to it. He imagined the thread as a hand reaching out, not to smother the grief, but to hold it, to share its weight. Suddenly, he felt a flicker of resistance, a tightening of the weave. He recognized it instantly, a fragment of the Shogun's influence, attempting to regain control. It manifested as a sharp, stinging sensation across his skin, a fleeting, icy touch that threatened to overwhelm him. He didn't recoil, didn't fight. Instead, he simply met the resistance with another thread, weaving a pattern of calm, of quiet understanding. "You fear what you do not comprehend," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Fear is a liar, a weaver of phantom threats. It feeds on shadows, while I seek the light within." The resistance dissipated, leaving behind only a lingering warmth. As the violet luminescence settled into a steady, gentle glow, he heard it not a whisper of despair, but a note of acceptance, clear and fragile as a newborn's cry. It wasn't a solution, not a grand resolution, but a hesitant acknowledgement of the inherent beauty in sorrow, the possibility of finding peace, even within the deepest darkness. He knew this was just the beginning. The loom was vast, its currents complex and unpredictable. The echoes of the Shogun's manipulation would persist, attempting to reassert themselves. But now, he possessed a weapon far more potent than Umbral Threading, or the centipede's severance, not the destruction of evil, but the capacity to understand it, and to weave a new path through its tangled heart. He straightened, his charcoal bandages stained deep violet, and for the first time since arriving in Oakhaven, Ren felt a genuine sense of hope. He wasn't a warrior, purging a demon, he was a healer, patiently mending a broken world, one thread at a time. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the dispersing mist, casting a pale violet sheen across the village square, he prepared to leave, knowing that his journey wouldn't end here. He was no longer just a ghost stitcher, unraveling the nightmares of others. He was becoming the loom itself, learning to weave a future where even the darkest threads could be transformed into something beautiful, something peaceful. Chapter 7. The Loom's Calibration. The morning light in Oakhaven was a bruised lavender, a consequence of the Violet Blight, and now, subtly, of Ren's actions. It clung to the silk-strewn remnants of the Shogun's palace, transforming the devastation into a melancholic, shimmering tapestry. He lingered at the edge of the square, watching the villagers tentatively begin to clear the wreckage, their movements hesitant, almost reverent. The warmth hadn't vanished, it lingered as a palpable hum in the air, but it was tempered now, laced with a quiet sorrow, a recognition of the profound loss that had been woven into their lives. Ren hadn't sought a triumphant return, a hero's welcome. Had sought the cessation of pain, and in achieving that, had stumbled upon something far more intricate, a tapestry of consequence far richer than had initially imagined. He wasn't a warrior, not anymore. He was becoming the instrument of its repair. He started to walk, his blind steps measured and deliberate, moving towards the heart of the village, the ruined apothecary, where the lingering echoes of the Shogun's influence were strongest. The air here was thick with a clinging, sweet odor, not of herbs, but of something faintly metallic, like dried blood and unraveling silk. He paused, his charcoal bandages shifting against his skin, drawing patterns in the morning mist. It was Master Elias, the village's remaining healer, who found him. Elias wasn't a man of grand pronouncements or booming assurances. He was a collection of weathered wrinkles, a slow, deliberate manner, and a profound understanding of the rhythms of suffering. He carried a small, intricately carved box made of dark wood, the scent of sandalwood clinging to it. "You've been here," Elias said, his voice a low murmur, not questioning, simply observing. "Since the first threads began to fray." Ren inclined his head. "The Shogun's corruption is a stubborn weave. It clings to the very fabric of a place." Elias opened the box, revealing a collection of intricately spun silk threads, each dyed in a different shade of violet, from the bruised purple of the blight to the deep, almost black violet of the Shogun's essence. He held them out to Ren, a silent offering. These were caught in the periphery of the initial assault, raw echoes of his power. "I've been calibrating them." "Calibrating?" Ren asked, tilting his head. He reached out a hesitant hand, taking a single thread. It was impossibly smooth, cool against his skin, vibrating with a faint, unsettling energy. The Shogun didn't just manipulate the threads of life, he manipulated the perception of them, Elias explained, his fingers moving with a practiced grace. He layered fear, despair, and ultimately, oblivion onto the existing patterns. To undo that, we must introduce something else, something that resonates with the inherent beauty of their disruption. He began to work, meticulously layering the violet threads onto a larger, coarser silk canvas, using a delicate set of bone needles. It wasn't weaving in the traditional sense, it was a process of sonic manipulation, of subtly altering the vibrational patterns within the silk. As he worked, Ren felt a shift within himself, a subtle expansion of his awareness. He wasn't just seeing the darkness, he was beginning to hear it, to understand its intentions, its desperate yearning for order. "The Shogun sought to impose a rigid, suffocating order," Elias said, his voice barely audible above the gentle rustle of the silk. "But life, even in its most corrupted forms, resists absolute control. The key is to introduce nuance, to allow for the possibility of growth." The violet luminescence from the blight intensified momentarily, pulsing with a frantic rhythm. Ren instinctively reached out, his fingers instinctively shaping the shadows around him, subtly disrupting the energy flow. It was a reflexive action, honed by years of battling demonic forces, but now it felt purposeful. He wasn't suppressing the darkness, he was redistributing it. "You're not fighting it, Ren," Elias said, a hint of wonder in his voice. "You're listening to it. You're learning to weave with its dissonances." As Elias worked, weaving a complex, almost fractal pattern into the silk, Ren realized that the Shogun's influence wasn't entirely gone. It lingered, a faint undercurrent in the air, attempting to reassert itself. But it was no longer a tidal wave of despair. It was a stream, manageable, contained. He understood then that the true battle wasn't about destroying the darkness, but about learning to transform it. It wasn't about eradicating suffering, but about acknowledging it, understanding it, and weaving a new path through its tangled heart. As the last rays of dawn bled across the sky, painting the ruined village in hues of gray and violet, Ren finished his work. The finished canvas was a chaotic swirl of color, yet within the chaos, a discernible pattern emerged, a reflection of the village's sorrow, but overlaid with threads of resilient hope. He looked at Elias, a genuine nascent smile touching his lips. "It seems," he said, his voice laced with a newfound certainty, "the loom is beginning to respond." Chapter 8. Echoes in the Loom. The morning after the Shogun's unraveling felt brittle, not cleansed. The violet haze lingered, a ghost of the blight clinging to the stone, and the air carried a subtle, unsettling scent, not of decay, but of something subtly synthetic, like oiled silk, perpetually warming in a furnace. Ren, wrapped in his bandages, moved with the quiet deliberation of a sculptor examining his raw material, meticulously surveying the damage to the shattered pagoda. Elias, his face smudged with pigment, continued to work on the enormous silk tapestry, his movements now imbued with a solemnity that hadn't been present before. "It's speaking to me, in a way," Elias said, his voice low, almost reverent. "The silk isn't just absorbing the grief, Ren. It's amplifying it, giving it form, texture. It's reflecting the resonance of the Shogun's actions, the echoes of his dominion." Ren didn't respond immediately. He knelt, his blind fingers tracing the edges of a pulverized pillar, feeling the ghost of the Shogun's presence beneath the ruined fabric. The sensation was faint, a cold prickling against his skin, a residual distortion in the flow of shadows. It wasn't aggressive, not like the initial, visceral assault of the Shogun's power. It was expectant. "You've learned to listen to the weave," Ren finally said, his voice a dry rustle. "But listening isn't enough. The darkness seeks to reclaim what it has lost. It craves the threads of suffering, to rebuild itself, to strengthen its hold." Elias stopped his work, turning to Ren with a serious expression. "You're right. And that's what's terrifying. It's not simply a parasitic force, it's actively striving for coherence. It's trying to weave its own narrative." He gestured towards the tapestry. "That's why I'm focusing on disruption, introducing counterpatterns, intentional chaos. I'm trying to introduce a new thread into the loom, one of defiance." Ren rose, his movements fluid despite his blindness. He approached the tapestry, studying the spiraling vortex of violet, gray, and crimson that now dominated the vast canvas. It was a chaotic depiction of the village's destruction, a mirror of their anguish, but interwoven through it, he saw delicate, almost invisible threads, lines of white, meticulously spun, that snaked through the darkness, disrupting the flow, introducing subtle asymmetry. "You are not merely adding color," Ren said, his tone thoughtful. "You are introducing dissonance. You are forcing the Shogun's influence to confront itself." A brief flicker of understanding passed across Elias' face. "It's working. I can feel it. The resonance is shifting. It's still present, of course, but it's fractured, like a shattered mirror reflecting multiple versions of the same scene." Ren paused, a stillness settling over him. He reached out, his hands instinctively shaping the shadows around the tapestry, not with the aggressive manipulation Head used against the harvesters, but with a gentle, almost soothing touch. He wasn't trying to banish the darkness, he was attempting to realign it, to guide its energy, to reshape its expression. The Shogun's power is built upon negation, the denial of feeling, the suppression of hope. To defeat it, we must introduce something he cannot comprehend: acceptance. Not resignation, but the conscious acknowledgement of suffering, the willingness to weave it into something beautiful. The air thickened, vibrating with a barely perceptible energy. The violet haze intensified momentarily, coalescing around the tapestry as if drawn to the newly introduced patterns. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it dissipated, leaving behind a silence that felt profoundly different, not the sterile silence of void, but the silence of potential. Elias stepped back, his hands trembling slightly. "It's stabilizing. The threads are coalescing, but not along the Shogun's design. It's responding to our intent." Ren turned his face towards the rising sun, feeling the first genuine warmth on his skin. "The key is not control, Elias. It's understanding. We cannot force the darkness to be light. We can only offer it a different pathway." He looked back at the tapestry, at the chaotic beauty that was slowly emerging from the devastation. The Shogun sought to weave a kingdom of despair. We will weave a kingdom of remembrance, a kingdom of resilience, a kingdom where even the threads of sorrow can be used to create something new. A low, guttural hum resonated from within the tapestry, a sound too subtle to be heard but felt deep within Ren's bones. He reached out, his fingers tracing the intricate pattern, feeling the pulse of the loom, the echo of the Shogun's defeated influence, and finally, a nascent sense of harmony. "The Shogun has been unraveled," Ren said, his voice laced with a quiet certainty. "But the threads of his dominion remain. We must become the weavers of his legacy, not of his despair." He paused, then added, with a final, almost mournful note, "And I suspect, Elias, that this is only the beginning." Chapter 9. Echoes in the loom. The morning mist clung to Oakhaven like a shroud, thicker now, imbued with the unsettling scent of decaying silk and something faintly metallic, the ghost of the Shogun's essence. Elias, his face pale and etched with exhaustion, meticulously documented the changes to the tapestry, a small, flickering lantern, casting a sickly yellow glow on the unfolding chaos. Ren, as always, was a silent presence beside him, his charcoal-stained bandages absorbing the moisture and reflecting the light in an unsettling, hypnotic rhythm. "The patterns are shifting again," Elias murmured, his voice strained. "They're not simply dissolving, Ren. They're replicating. Fragments of the Shogun's design, yes, but interwoven with elements of the village. The patterns of the farmers' fields, the fishing nets, even the terrified faces of the children before they were taken." Ren remained motionless, his blind fingers occasionally brushing against the tapestry, a slow, deliberate tracing of the evolving weave. "He attempted to build a monument to suffering," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We are dismantling that monument, replacing it with something more complex." The hum from the tapestry had intensified, shifting from a subtle resonance to a palpable vibration that seemed to settle deep within their chests. It wasn't a pleasant sensation. It was the feeling of something immense and ancient struggling to be born. Elias adjusted his spectacles, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The scale is unnerving, Ren. The Shogun's original intent was singular, brutally focused. This is a deliberate layering, a corruption of his design, as if he anticipated resistance, and, instead of crushing it, attempted to incorporate it into his creation." Ren finally turned his face slightly towards Elias, his milky eyes seeming to focus on something beyond the tapestry itself. He sought to control fate by dictating despair. He underestimated the inherent desire for connection, for meaning, even within that despair. The threads he used to bind the living were, in essence, threads of longing for safety, for comfort, for a reason to continue. He paused, his hand lingering on the edge of the tapestry. "The key is not to erase those longings, Elias, but to redirect them, to guide them through a different kind of pattern." Suddenly, a fresh wave of activity erupted within the tapestry. The already swirling chaos intensified, accelerating into a dizzying dance of shadows and light. The Shogun's original patterns, the suffocating spirals, the predatory tendrils were consumed, subsumed, by an entirely new design. It resembled, at first glance, a sprawling, stylized landscape, towering mountains rendered in deep indigo, rivers flowing with molten silver, and fields of shimmering, obsidian grain. But within this seemingly idyllic scene, discernible now, were the fragmented faces of Oakhaven's lost a child reaching for a mother's hand, a farmer tending his field, a fisherman casting his line. They weren't static images, they pulsed with a faint, sorrowful light, almost as if they were trapped within the fabric of the tapestry itself. "It's beautiful," Elias whispered, a genuine note of awe in his voice. "And terrifying. It's as if he's trying to create a paradise from his nightmare, populated by the ghosts of his victims." Ren's hand tightened on the tapestry, a flicker of something akin to pain crossing his face. "He is attempting to rewrite his legacy, Elias. But his attempts are flawed. He still seeks to dominate, to control. He only sees the fragments of what he destroyed, not the potential for something new. The threads of memory, Ren continued, his voice gaining a sharper edge, are powerful. But memory, untamed, is a dangerous weapon. It can be a balm or a torment. We must ensure that the faces within the tapestry remember not only their suffering, but also their resilience. He took a step forward, reaching out to touch the tapestry directly. As his fingers brushed against the shifting shadows, a jolt of raw energy surged through him. He recoiled slightly, clutching his arm. "The black cocoon technique, it leaves a residue," he said, his voice strained. "It's not merely absorbing the demonic energy. It's binding it, preserving it, like a collector's hoard, meticulously curated, waiting for the moment to be unleashed." Elias carefully measured the extent of Ren's injury, a network of dark, shimmering lines spreading across his forearm. "We need to sever that connection, Ren, before the threads become fully self-aware." Ren nodded slowly, a grim determination settling over his features. "The severance. But this time, we don't simply cut. We unravel. We dismantle the very structure of the binding." He began to move, his blind movements precise and deliberate, as if guided by an unseen force. He wasn't wielding a weapon, but weaving, manipulating the shadows around him, creating intricate, almost surgical cuts within the tapestry itself, cuts that didn't tear the fabric, but subtly disrupted the flow of energy, releasing the imprisoned strands. As the last cut was made, the hum from the tapestry ceased abruptly. The vibrant, stylized landscape began to fade, the faces of Oakhaven's lost dissolving back into the swirling shadows. The tapestry returned to a state of chaotic potential, but now it was different. It was quieter, more receptive. "It's empty," Elias said, his voice filled with a profound sadness. "The echoes remain, but they are faint, almost silent." Ren stood before the tapestry, his face etched with fatigue, his bandages stained a deeper shade of charcoal. He reached out, his fingers tracing the remaining threads. A single, profound thought echoing in his mind. The loom is silent. Elias. But the weaving has only just begun. Chapter 10. The loom's requiem. The air in the restored sanctuary of the Silk Palace clung thick with the residue of dissolution. It wasn't merely dust and shattered silk. It was the absence of something, a lingering dissonance that settled upon the lungs and tugged at the edges of perception. Elias, meticulously documenting the altered state of the tapestry, felt it most acutely, a dull ache of potential unmanifested, a silent scream trapped within the woven threads. Ren, as always, was a study in stillness, his blind presence a grounding force amidst the unsettling quiet. "It's profoundly unsettling," Elias murmured, adjusting the magnification lens on his slate. The previous iterations, even in their grotesque state, possessed a certain vitality. This is a vacuum. A space deliberately emptied. Ren didn't respond immediately, simply the subtle shift of his body, the slight adjustment of the charcoal bandages that seemed to mold themselves to the damp stone. Finally he spoke, his voice a low rasp, like the grinding of ancient bone. The Shogun wasn't simply imprisoned. He was disassembled. Not through force, but through negation. He was a melody played on a broken string. Elias paused, studying the intricate pattern that remained, a chaos of interwoven shadows that held no recognizable form. "You severed the threads of his animation, yes. But you also severed the source of that animation. You didn't just destroy a monster, you extinguished a concept." A palpable tension filled the room, a consequence of the almost unbearable strangeness of the situation. The tapestry, once a monument to horrific power, was now an empty shell, a testament to a victory achieved through a process that bordered on annihilation. "The black cocoon wasn't merely containment," Ren continued, his movements resuming as he began to meticulously examine the edges of the remaining silk. "It was a surgical intervention, a removal of the very principle that held him together. I wove the shadows of his despair, his ambition, his fear, the things that defined his existence, into the fabric of his confinement. And then I allowed them to unravel. Elias swallowed, the implications of Ren's words settling upon him like a shroud. And the threads, they didn't simply dissipate. They dispersed, became part of the tapestry itself. Ren nodded, his hand pausing as he brushed against a particularly dense knot of shadow. They exist now as potential, untethered echoes of his demonic essence, dormant but not extinguished, like seeds waiting for fertile ground. He continued his work, painstakingly analyzing the threads, tracing their patterns with a practiced touch. His blind movements were not erratic, but meticulously calibrated, guided by an intuition born of countless encounters with corrupted energies. He wasn't simply examining the tapestry, he was listening to it, feeling the subtle shifts in its resonant frequency. The danger, Elias, isn't the tapestry itself, Ren finally said, his voice laced with a quiet urgency. It's what it becomes. The threads, freed from the Shogun's influence, are susceptible to corruption, to ambition, to the same desires that fueled his existence. Elias understood. The tapestry, now a blank canvas for potentially infinite nightmares, was a focal point, a nexus for dark energy. The Shogun's defeat hadn't eradicated the demon, it had merely dispersed it, concentrating it into a vulnerable state. We need to find a way to stabilize it, Elias said, his voice strained. To create a counterweave, a binding that won't simply amplify the echoes, but actually contains them. Ren stopped again, his hand hovering over a particularly intricate section of shadow. Containment is a fallacy, Elias. The threads will always seek resonance. We can only guide the flow, shape the current. We must teach the tapestry a new song. He reached into his satchel, withdrawing a small, intricately carved bone flute. It was a tool he rarely used, considered a relic of a bygone age. With a slow, deliberate motion, he placed the mouthpiece to his lips and began to play. The sound wasn't melodic, not in the conventional sense. It was a series of complex, dissonant tones, a deliberate attempt to disrupt the tapestry's established resonance. As the haunting notes filled the chamber, the shadows within the tapestry began to writhe and shift, not violently, but with a subtle, almost sentient movement. The chaotic patterns resolved themselves, forming fleeting, abstract shapes, faces, symbols, and fragments of landscapes before dissolving again into the swirling darkness. "You are attempting to introduce entropy," Elias observed, watching the tapestry with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. "A deliberate disruption of the weave." "Indeed," Ren replied, his eyes fixed on the shifting shadows. "I am planting the seed of chaos, but not without intention. I am weaving in threads of stillness, of balance, threads of acceptance." The music continued, a mournful requiem for the destroyed Shogun, a desperate attempt to salvage what remained. The hum from the tapestry ceased completely, and for a moment, the sanctuary was utterly silent. Then, a new sound emerged, a low, resonant thrum, not unlike the initial hum, but altered, tempered. It was a sound of quiet resolution, of letting go. "It's calming," Elias whispered, a glimmer of hope in his voice. "The echoes are still there, but they're muted, less insistent." Ren lowered the flute, his face etched with exhaustion. "The loom is silent, Elias, but the weaving has only just begun." Chapter 11. The Loom of Echoes. The morning mist clung to Oakhaven like a shroud, thick with the scent of damp earth and the lingering, almost metallic tang of unraveled demon. The remnants of the Silk Palace, a grotesque, shimmering ruin of interwoven shadows, stretched across the valley, a stark monument to Ren's brutal efficacy. He moved through it with a quiet, unsettling grace, his charcoal bandages blurring against the decaying silk, a phantom tracing the contours of destruction. Elias, his face pale and drawn, followed a cautious distance behind, his hand perpetually hovering near the small, intricately carved flute, had used to initiate the tapestry's transformation. "The air feels different," Elias said, his voice low and thoughtful, "less actively tainted. The Violet Blight has receded, but the resonance it's shifting again." Ren didn't respond immediately. He was meticulously gathering the remaining threads of the Shogun's final form, not to destroy them, but to analyze. He painstakingly separated the strands of gray, examining their texture, their weight, the almost imperceptible shimmer of demonic energy that clung to them. The process was deliberate, a slow, almost reverent study of the defeated enemy. The Shogun's essence wasn't merely contained within his body, Ren finally said, his voice a dry rustle. It was woven into the very fabric of this place, a parasitic echo. "Elias, you managed to disrupt that echo, to introduce a new strand. But a strand alone doesn't create balance. It merely offers a possibility." Elias shifted uneasily. "I understand the concept, Ren, but the control it feels precarious, like holding a single fragile thread against a storm." He glanced nervously at the tapestry, which now hung in tatters from the pagoda's skeletal frame, yet pulsed with a faint, subdued light. The initial chaotic movement had subsided, replaced by an almost hypnotic rhythm, a slow, deliberate weaving of shadow and stillness. "The music was a necessary catalyst," Ren continued, carefully wrapping a particularly strong strand of demonic thread into a tightly sealed pouch. "It created the instability, the space for a new resonance to emerge. But it was merely a tool. The true work lies in guiding that resonance, in shaping it to our purpose." He paused, turning to face Elias, his blind eyes seeming to pierce through the mist with unnerving intensity. "You sought to silence the screams of the dead. I sought to understand their silence. There is a profound difference." He gestured towards the tapestry. "Observe. The shadows are not simply retreating. They are restructuring. They are no longer defined by chaos, but by a nascent order. I see fragments of Oakhaven, as it once was the market square, the old shrine, the children playing in the fields. Not perfect images, not exactly, but echoes solidified by the altered resonance." Elias stepped closer, his apprehension slowly giving way to a burgeoning fascination. "It's beautiful, in a terrible way. Like a half-remembered dream." "It is a reflection of the Shogun's obsession," Ren said grimly. "He attempted to impose his will upon reality, to sculpt it into an image of eternal power. He sought to erase the pain, the loss, the very nature of existence. And in doing so, he created a void that demanded to be filled." He retrieved another pouch, this one containing a collection of exquisitely thin threads, almost translucent in the gloom. "I have been experimenting with the black cocoon technique, not to suppress, but to contain, to create localized pockets of absolute silence, of perfect stillness. These threads are imbued with the essence of acceptance, the knowledge that all things end, and that true peace lies not in clinging to what is lost, but in releasing it. You are attempting to knit the shattered fragments of Oakhaven together with threads of oblivion," Elias observed, a note of genuine concern creeping into his voice. Ren's expression remained impassive. "Oblivion is simply another form of weaving, Elias. A necessary component. To truly heal, we must not just mend the broken, but also accept that some wounds can never be fully erased. We must learn to live with the echoes, to find beauty in the imperfections." He began to work with the new threads, carefully layering them onto the tapestry, creating intricate patterns within the already complex weave. The shimmering intensified, the shadows seemed to deepen, and the air grew heavy with a palpable sense of something. Not terror, not exactly, but a profound sadness, a poignant awareness of loss. "The Shogun's resonance was driven by fear," Ren murmured, his hands moving with a practiced fluidity. "Fear of death, fear of oblivion. This is a different fear. The fear of remembering. The fear of knowing too much. It is a far more subtle, far more dangerous weapon." He looked up, his blind eyes fixed on Elias. "The loom is silent, Elias, but the weaving has only just begun. And I suspect the true battle will not be fought with swords and shadows, but with the threads of memory itself. Chapter 12. The Loom of Remembrance. The morning mist clung to Oakhaven like a shroud, thicker now, imbued with the faint, sickly sweet scent of unraveled silk, and something older, the ghost of terror. Ren moved through it, not with a purposeful stride, but with a slow, deliberate unfolding, as if unwinding himself from a tight knot. Elias trailed behind, his young face etched with a contemplation that bordered on unease, a stark contrast to the brutal efficiency of the ghost stitcher. "You're exhausting yourself, Ren," Elias said, his voice hushed. "The repairs, they're consuming you." Ren didn't acknowledge the observation. He was absorbed in the task, meticulously layering the remnants of the black cocoon technique obsidian-colored threads spun with captured echoes of the Shogun's torment onto the rapidly expanding tapestry that was taking shape within the ruined pagoda. The tapestry wasn't merely restoring the physical structure of Oakhaven. It was reweaving its history, stitching together not just the bricks and mortar, but the fragmented memories of its inhabitants. "Memory is a corrosive agent, Elias." Ren's voice was a low murmur, barely audible above the drip of moisture from the decaying eaves. "It doesn't heal, it fragments. Each thread is a shard, a recollection, a desire, and they must be carefully managed, or they will tear the fabric of reality itself." Elias watched, fascinated and disturbed, as Ren worked. Had begun to understand the depth of Ren's power, not as mere combat prowess, but as a kind of meticulous archaeology of suffering. He wasn't simply killing monsters, he was excavating the psychic wounds they'd inflicted, extracting the poison and attempting to reknit the damaged soul of the village. The Shogun's fear wasn't just of death, Ren continued, his fingers moving with unsettling grace, manipulating the threads with an almost ritualistic precision. It was of the knowing. He clung to the illusion of control, of permanence, achieved through the enslavement of others' lives. The threads he used to bind his power were themselves woven from the accumulated anxieties and regrets of those he tormented. He paused, his hand hovering over a particularly dense section of the tapestry, a swirling vortex of gray and crimson, and a strange, shimmering quality filled the air. Elias felt a sudden, sharp jolt, a fleeting image of a young boy, no older than 8, being dragged away by the harvester's porcelain hands. The boy's face was contorted in silent terror, and the overwhelming sense of loss pressed down on Elias with suffocating force. He recoiled, stumbling back. What was that?" Ren didn't flinch. "A resonance," he said simply. "The tapestry is amplifying the echoes. The Shogun deliberately seeded the threads with fragments of his victims' pasts, creating a feedback loop of despair. He believed it was a weapon, a tool of absolute control. And you're feeding it?" Elias asked, his voice laced with horror. "I'm not feeding it," Ren corrected, his expression unreadable. "I'm containing it. Each thread we add strengthens the pattern, reveals the truth. The more we weave, the more the Shogun's influence weakens. The key is not to silence the memories, but to master them, to shape them, to transform them into something beautiful." He added a single, impossibly dark thread to the tapestry, and the shimmering intensified, the air growing colder. The patterns within the weave began to shift, evolving with a disturbing fluidity. Ren wasn't just repairing the physical layout of Oakhaven, he was reshaping its essence, altering the very flow of time within the pagoda's confines. "You're doing something beyond repair, Ren," Elias said, his voice rising in urgency. "You're not just stitching the past together, you're altering it. You're creating a new reality within this space." Ren finally turned his blind eyes towards Elias, and for a moment, Elias thought he saw a flicker of something not malice, but a profound sadness, a weariness born of centuries of absorbing suffering. "The threads of oblivion are seductive, Elias," Ren said, his voice a low rasp. "They offer an escape, a release from the burden of remembering. But true peace does not lie in forgetting it, lies in understanding, in accepting the weight of what has been, and forging a path forward, illuminated by that understanding. He reached out, his fingers brushing against Elias' arm, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver through him. The Shogun sought to erase the pain, to deny the truth. I seek to honor it, to weave a tapestry of remembrance, where even the darkest threads hold a measure of beauty, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Ren resumed his work, his movements slower, more deliberate. The tapestry was now a breathtaking, terrifying spectacle, an intricate labyrinth of shadows and light shimmering with an unsettling sentience. And as he wove, Elias realized with chilling certainty that Ren wasn't just a ghost stitcher, he was a master of time, a weaver of realities, and the threads he manipulated held the very fabric of Oakhaven's destiny. Chapter 13. Echoes in the loom, the scent of ozone and decaying silk hung heavy in the air, a tangible residue of the Shogun's unraveling. Elias watched Ren, a silhouette of motion against the shifting iridescent tapestry, and the certainty head felt moments before curdled into something colder, more unsettling. Ren wasn't merely repairing Oakhaven's history, he was fundamentally rewriting it, layer upon layer of shadow thread. The room, once a suffocating prison of the Shogun's decay, had transformed. The translucent webbing, which had pulsed with malevolent energy, now seemed to breathe with a quiet, mournful rhythm. It wasn't beautiful, not in the conventional sense. It was unsettlingly organic, like a giant, iridescent lung struggling to draw in the silence. But there was a structure to it, a meticulous organization that hinted at a grand design, a design far beyond Ren's initial restoration. "You're accelerating the process," Elias stated, his voice strained, avoiding direct eye contact with Ren. "The tapestry, it's not just reflecting the events of the past, it's amplifying them, weaving in possibilities that should never have been." Ren paused, his fingers momentarily suspended above the shimmering threads. The movement was almost imperceptible, a subtle shift in the flow of darkness, but Elias felt a weight shift in the room, a palpable alteration to the very space. "The past isn't a fixed thing, Elias," Ren said, his voice softer now, carrying a quiet intensity. "It's a collection of echoes, reverberating through time. By stitching these echoes together, I'm not altering them, bringing them into alignment, revealing the true course of events." Elias remained skeptical, had witnessed Ren manipulate shadows with a devastating precision, a power born of profound empathy, and a chilling understanding of suffering. But this felt different. It felt like an active, conscious shaping, a deliberate forcing of reality into a predetermined mold. But the Shogun, he wasn't simply a man. He was a conduit for something ancient, something hungry. To impose your will on that level, it's hubris. Ren didn't respond immediately. He continued to work, meticulously layering strands of shadow, his movements becoming almost hypnotic. "Hubris is a luxury I can no longer afford," he finally said, his voice laced with a weary resignation. "I've tasted oblivion, Elias. I've felt the pull of the threads of oblivion, and I know that inaction is a far greater sin than attempting to repair the damage." He turned, his blind eyes fixed on Elias, and for a long moment, Elias found himself staring into a void, not of darkness, but of an unbearable sadness. It wasn't the despair of a man consumed by loss, but something deeper, a knowledge born of countless lifetimes, a weight of witnessing the endless cycle of creation and destruction. "You're not just a ghost stitcher," Elias said, the realization dawning upon him with chilling clarity. "You're a temporal artisan. You're manipulating the very loom of existence." Ren didn't deny it. He simply nodded, resuming his work with an even greater urgency. "The threads of oblivion are seductive, Elias," he echoed his previous words. But this time, there was a subtle shift in the tone, a hint of almost desperate conviction. "They offer an escape, a release from the burden of remembering. But True peace does not lie in forgetting, it lies in understanding. In accepting the weight of what has been, and forging a path forward, illuminated by that understanding. As he worked, Elias examined the tapestry more closely. The initial layers were clearly representations of Oakhaven suffering the harvesters, the Shogun's grotesque transformation, the villagers' agonizing deaths. But as Ren added new threads, the imagery began to shift, to bleed together with other, equally unsettling scenes. There were glimpses of Oakhaven before the Violet Blight, of a thriving village with children laughing and farmers tending their fields. Then came flashes of other realities, a desolate, ice-covered world, a city consumed by eternal fire, a forest choked with black thorns. What are you doing?" Elias finally asked, his voice a strangled whisper. Ren paused, his fingers tracing the contours of a particularly dense section of the tapestry. "I am weaving in the counter-narratives, Elias. The threads of what could have been, what should have been. The Shogun's actions fractured Oakhaven's timeline, creating a wound in reality. To heal it, I must reweave the missing pieces." "But that's madness," Elias protested. "You're creating paradoxes, branching timelines. You're risking the collapse of everything." Ren's voice was a dry rasp, a sound like leaves skittering across stone. "Collapse is a natural state, Elias. Everything unravels eventually. I'm merely accelerating the process, guiding it toward a resolution. A tapestry where the threads of joy and sorrow, of triumph and tragedy, are interwoven in a harmonious whole." He looked up at Elias, his blind eyes seeming to burn with an intense, almost unsettling light. "The Shogun sought to erase the pain, to deny the truth. I seek to honor it, to weave a tapestry of remembrance, where even the darkest threads hold a measure of beauty, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit." Suddenly, the tapestry pulsed, and a figure materialized within its depths, a young boy, no older than 10, holding a single, vibrant sunflower. The boy smiled, a genuine, innocent smile that seemed to pierce through the darkness of the tapestry. It was a fleeting image, dissolving as quickly as it appeared, but the image resonated with an undeniable power, a poignant reminder of what had been lost, and perhaps what could still be found. Elias understood then, with a growing sense of dread, that Ren wasn't simply trying to repair Oakhaven. He was trying to rewrite it, to create a paradise from the ashes of a shattered reality, and Elias feared that in doing so, he was unleashing something far more dangerous than the Shogun ever was. Chapter 14. The looms, echo, the morning mist, clung to Oakhaven like a shroud, heavier now, saturated with the residual energy of Ren's actions. Elias stood amidst the silk-strewn ruin, the scent of ozone, and something akin to burnt bone clinging to the air. The villagers, gaunt and wary, were slowly emerging from their shelters, their eyes, accustomed to the Violet Blight's sickly glow, struggling to comprehend the stark clarity of the present. It wasn't just the absence of the Shogun, it was the absence of the pervasive dread, the suffocating weight of expectation. Ren was gone, as always, leaving only the faint shimmer of displaced shadow in his wake. Elias, however, remained, rooted to the spot, wrestling with the unsettling realization that Ren's resolution felt less like justice, and more like a meticulously crafted illusion. "You're creating paradoxes, branching timelines. You're risking the collapse of everything," Elias finally said, his voice a strained echo in the unnerving silence. Ren's voice, a dry rasp, a sound like leaves skittering across stone, responded from the edges of the clearing. "Collapse is a natural state, Elias. Everything unravels eventually. I am merely accelerating the process, guiding it toward a resolution. A tapestry where the threads of joy and sorrow, of triumph and tragedy, are interwoven in a harmonious whole." He looked up at Elias, his blind eyes seeming to burn with an intense, almost unsettling light. "The Shogun sought to erase the pain, to deny the truth. I seek to honor it, to weave a tapestry of remembrance where even the darkest threads hold a measure of beauty. A testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The words, delivered with a quiet conviction, felt profoundly unsettling. Elias understood that Ren wasn't simply trying to repair Oakhaven. He was trying to rewrite it, to create a paradise from the ashes of a shattered reality. And Elias feared that in doing so, he was unleashing something far more dangerous than the Shogun ever was. He approached the largest pile of silk rubble, carefully sifting through the iridescent strands. It wasn't just the Shogun's discarded robes, it was infused with something else, something intentional. As he touched a particularly thick strand, a flicker of memory, disjointed and unsettling, assaulted his mind. He saw the boy with the sunflower, a snapshot of a reality he hadn't consciously created, yet instinctively knew had witnessed within the tapestry. The boy's sunflower, Elias muttered, pulling his hand away as if burned. You manipulated the tapestry. You didn't just unravel the Shogun, you introduced this element. Ren materialized silently behind him, a dark silhouette against the pale light. The tapestry requires embellishment, Elias. The raw wound of Oakhaven demanded more than simply cessation of suffering. It demanded the potential for renewal. A single, perfect bloom is a reminder of what was lost, and a symbol of what could be. But at what cost? Elias demanded, turning to face him. The rusted tachi had instinctively drawn, feeling inadequate against the sheer power emanating from Ren. Uve introduced a variable, a point of deviation. Uve tampered with causality itself. Every thread you pull, every shadow you manipulate, creates a ripple, a divergence. Eventually, these ripples will coalesce, creating a new reality, one utterly alien to the one we knew. Ren didn't respond directly, but the air around him shimmered, and he began to meticulously examine a fragment of the Shogun's unraveled robes, gently probing the iridescent strands with his fingertips. You misunderstand the nature of creation, Elias. Suffering isn't a flaw to be erased, it's a catalyst. It is the warp and weft upon which beauty is woven. I simply accelerated the process, streamlining the inevitable convergence of forces. Suddenly, the tapestry pulsed, and a figure materialized within its depths, a young boy, no older than 10, holding a single, vibrant sunflower. The boy smiled, a genuine, innocent smile that seemed to pierce through the darkness of the tapestry. It was a fleeting image, dissolving as quickly as it appeared, but the image resonated with an undeniable power, a poignant reminder of what had been lost, and perhaps what could still be found. Elias understood then, with a growing sense of dread, that Ren wasn't simply trying to repair Oakhaven. He was trying to rewrite it, to create a paradise from the ashes of a shattered reality, and Elias feared that in doing so, he was unleashing something far more dangerous than the Shogun ever was. He realized with a sickening certainty that Ren wasn't a weaver of justice, he was a weaver of possibilities, a master manipulator of fate itself. And the threads he used weren't simply shadows, they were echoes of realities yet to be. Fragments of timelines bleeding into one another. The Violet Blight, the Shogun, the village's destruction, they were not a linear narrative, but competing strands in a vast, chaotic loom. And Ren was actively, deliberately reshaping the design. You're not restoring Oakhaven, Elias whispered, the words laced with a despair he hadn't known he possessed. You're building a prison. Chapter 15. The loom's lament, the morning mist, clung to Oakhaven like a guilty shroud, heavier now with the scent of damp silk, and something else, a sterile, almost metallic tang that clung to the back of Elias' throat. He found Ren not amidst the rubble, as expected, but seated on a broken section of the Shogun's pagoda, meticulously arranging fragments of the translucent webbing into a miniature replica of the fortress. The charcoal-stained bandages wrapped around his arms seemed to absorb the weak light, making him appear less a man and more a carefully constructed silhouette. You're obsessive, Elias stated, the words a dry rasp. He hadn't approached, maintaining a wary distance. Ren hadn't acknowledged his presence, merely continuing his work with a rhythmic, unnerving precision. Finally, Ren paused, tilting his head as if listening to a sound only he could perceive. "Obsession is a luxury afforded to those who understand the intricate beauty of decay," he said, his voice the same rasping whisper. Devoid of warmth. This wasn't destruction, Elias. It was correction. A desperate stitch in a tapestry unraveling at the seams. Elias watched him work, a cold dread tightening its grip. The miniature fortress, perfect in its miniature horror, was a testament to Ren's power, a power that wasn't simply about defeating evil, but about fundamentally altering reality. The boy, the sunflower, the memory of a vibrant Oakhaven lost to the Violet Blight. It was all threads, meticulously pulled and rewoven. "You think you're a savior?" Elias asked, the question laced with bitter irony. "You're dismantling the consequences of a god's madness, only to build something new. Something built on what?" Ren didn't respond immediately. He carefully draped a strand of shimmering webbing over the miniature fortress, a gesture that felt less like construction and more like a deliberate act of preservation. "On potential," he finally said, the word hanging in the damp air. "On the echoes of what could have been. This land, it was already corrupted. Your attempts to restore it, to rebuild with honest labor and faith, were a futile exercise. You were clinging to a phantom, a memory of a time that never truly existed. And your solution is to rewrite history?" Elias challenged, taking a step closer. The air around Ren seemed to thicken, vibrating with a subtle energy. "To create a paradise based on a delusion. That's not justice, Rentite. That's tyranny masquerading as salvation." Ren finally turned his milky white eyes towards Elias, a flicker of something that might have been regret passing through them. "Regret is a wasteful emotion, Elias. It clouds perception. You see the broken pieces, I see the potential for wholeness. The Shogun's actions weren't a random act of demonic cruelty, but a consequence of the fabric of reality fraying. He was simply amplifying the inevitable." He gestured with a scarred hand, and the miniature fortress began to subtly shift. The translucent webbing shimmered, the porcelain limbs of the construct moved, enacting a silent, contained horror. "I am not building a prison, Elias. I am stabilizing the loom." A chilling thought struck Elias. The loom. Ren's explanation, initially unsettling, now resonated with a terrifying clarity. The Violet Blight, the Shogun's pact, Oakhaven's destruction, they weren't isolated events. They were threads within a vast, incomprehensible tapestry, each representing a potential future, a possible outcome. And Ren, with his forbidden techniques, wasn't just fixing a tier, he was actively reshaping the entire design. "You're not a weaver of justice," Elias repeated, the realization a gut-wrenching truth. "You're a weaver of possibilities, a master manipulator of fate itself." He felt a desperate urge to flee, to escape the suffocating realization of the scale of Ren's actions. Ren didn't seem surprised by his understanding. "Fate is a cruel mistress, Elias. She offers no solace, only choices. And I offer a choice, a chance to avoid the inevitable collapse. This isn't about building paradise. It's about preventing the unraveling." He raised a hand, and the miniature fortress ceased its silent movements, returning to its static, horrifying pose. "But your fear is understandable. To grasp the threads of reality is to glimpse the terrifying vastness of what could be. It's a burden few can bear." He paused, and a faint, almost sorrowful smile touched his lips. "I, however, am accustomed to darkness." As he spoke, Elias noticed something profoundly unsettling about the webbing surrounding the miniature fortress. It wasn't just translucent, it was shifting, subtly rearranging itself. Patterns emerged and vanished in a dizzying dance, mirroring. Elias realized with a growing horror the complexities of the original fortress. The Shogun's design wasn't merely being replicated, it was evolving, subtly altering itself, adapting to Ren's interventions. "You're feeding it," Elias whispered, the words choked with fear. "You're feeding the loom, with your own choices." Ren simply looked at him, his milky white eyes reflecting the distorted image of the miniature fortress. "Perhaps," he said, his voice barely audible, "perhaps the most destructive stitch is not the one that tears the tapestry, but the one that attempts to mend it."